Most people think they need more talent before they start to create. They don't. They need more creative confidence. But the frustrating part is that in order to build your confidence, you have to create first. So grab your cup of tea and let's talk about the 5 ideas that completely change the way that I approach creativity. I would boldly guess that nearly everyone has some sort of creative project within them. Whether that is wanting to start a YouTube channel or a podcast or to post more consistently on LinkedIn or another social media platform or to write a book or to pursue a hobby. I believe that everyone has the seed of an idea within them. And despite their good intentions, usually most people don't actually pursue that idea. But the difference between the people that pursue those ideas and the people that don't isn't talent, it's creative confidence. And the good thing about creative confidence is that it's not something that you just simply need to be born with, it's something that you can develop. So, my first really important idea is to know thy enemy, which is resistance. Now, this is something that I just recently spoke about in my episode on the 1 hour rule. This is something that Stephen Pressfield, who is the absolute go to for creatives, talks about. It's the idea that it's not a lack of talent or a lack of time that is holding you back. It is resistance, and that is resistance with a capital R. You need to see resistance as this character that you are fighting against, as this internal force. And resistance is something that can show up with many different guises. So, for example, this is something that can show up as procrastination, as perfectionism, as over planning, as researching before you actually put things into practice, doing too much research. This can show up as busy work. It can show up as a fear of getting started because of other people's judgment or their criticism. It can show up as self-doubt. It can show up as even just waiting for inspiration. And it can show up in comparing yourself too much to other people before you actually get started. And Pressville highlights how this can show up in your everyday thoughts. So, for example, this is the thought that I'll start tomorrow, or I'm not ready yet, or I just need to take one more course, or I'll wait till I have more time, or what if they judge me, or someone else is already doing this. And what Pressville highlights is one of the key solutions to this is the 1 hour rule, which if you want to learn more about, then make sure you check out my earlier episode on this because I break down the maths related to that. But essentially, it is making time 1 hour a day to put your ass where your heart wants to be. So it really highlights the importance of a time and a place. Those 2 key elements are really important. So it's showing up consistently in that space. So for example, I show up consistently to create these videos for my YouTube channel, for my podcast in the same spot every week at the same time. So remind yourself by just committing to your time and your place, you are already fighting against resistance. My next idea I absolutely love. It has been one of my favorites as of late, and that is to create an alter ego. So do you ever get that feeling that there isn't possibly any way that you could take action towards a thing that you have had an idea about? That's okay, because maybe your alter ego can. The idea of an alter ego is something that really stood out to me when I read the book recently, The Alter Ego Effect, which I broke down my top 10 takeaways for in a recent episode. And the idea of creating an alter ego is something that is practiced by some of the world's greatest performers and athletes. They step into this performance identity that they have created for themselves. And what's really important to remember about this identity is that this is not an inauthentic version of yourself. This isn't a fake version of yourself. This is you unlocking the other side of your potential. So in the book, Herman says, the process of using an alter ego is not about changing one's fundamental self, but rather about revealing the heroic qualities that are already present within. So, what creating your alter ego does is that when you step into that alter ego, you are temporarily upgrading your self concept. And by upgrading your self concept, you are then shifting your behaviors to be more aligned with that alter ego version of yourself, with that ideal version of yourself that can achieve whatever it is that you hope to in a specific space. And a lot of the idea behind this is that you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your identity. So your identity is what is going to dictate your behaviors and the likelihood that you are going to achieve whatever it is that you want to achieve. And the idea of an alter ego is also backed by science as well. There was a study that was done with 3 groups of children that explored their performance. And the first group of children who were referring to themselves in the first person performed the worst out of the 3 groups. The group that was referring to themselves in the third person performed better. The group, however, that associated their work to their favorite character who stepped into that identity performed better than the other groups. So if you do want to learn more about creating an alter ego, then make sure you check out my earlier episode because I talk about the different strategies that Todd Herman describes in the book. So everything from having totems and artifacts and how you can engage activation events so you can actually step in to that alter ego that you have created for yourself. So make sure you check out that episode as well. The next game-changing habit for my own creativity personally has been the idea of morning pages and artist dates. Now, this is something that I talked about in an earlier episode because it has become one of my favorite new daily rituals, my daily habits in the last year or two that I have been practicing this. This was an idea that first resonated with me. Number one, because I actually heard a few friends mention it. I just remembered that before I even read the book that it came from. So it was an idea that a few people had mentioned to me that fully didn't land until I read the book. I always knew that journaling was something that I wanted to practice more, and I tried to practice it in different ways, but I struggled to make it consistent until I adopted this approach, until I shifted my mindset as to why it was so important and what I was trying to achieve out of it. So I read the book that the idea of morning pages originates from, and that is Julia Cameron's book, The Artist Way. Now, again, this is a book that is geared towards creatives, but it has an absolute cult following across all industries, particularly amongst A-listers and celebrities. This is a book that they absolutely love. And morning pages is one of the key tools that is highlighted in the book. And essentially, morning pages is about journaling as soon as you can in the morning. And that is for the purpose of trying to break through to the other side. So you're unlocking as much as you can of your subconscious in that really key time after you wake up. And what Julia Cameron proposes in the book is to write 3 handwritten pages. And to do this at the speed of your thoughts. So you're not trying to curate the perfect journal entry, for example. You are trying to get down your thoughts exactly as they come to you, as they are free flowing to you. And why this is really important is that you are trying to break through to the other side by overcoming the censor. So the censor is another enemy to capitalize, to put a name to, because this is the thing that is trying to keep you in your comfort zone. And this is something that Julia Cameron describes as this slithering snake that is in your thoughts, that is trying to keep you from doing the things that you have ideas towards, for example. But it means well. This is your logical brain trying to keep you safe, trying to keep you in your comfort zone so that you don't put yourself out there, so that you don't push yourself beyond what it thinks is where you need to be operating. So the idea behind morning pages is that you are trying to overcome that censor. And for me personally, as I've spoken about on this channel, the way that I practice morning pages is that instead of writing 3 handwritten pages, I write 1 page on my laptop. So I make this a digital process for me. So you might find that that works for you. You might find that the handwritten process works for you, which I know has a lot of benefits too, and something that I may explore again in the future as well. But for now, this is something that works for me. But the other tool that also works really well that Cameron really advocates for in the artist way is this idea of artist dates. So this is having a regular time in your schedule, maybe a couple of hours in your schedule every week that you dedicate to spending time with yourself in some sort of creative way. So, for example, you might take yourself out to a museum, you might take yourself out to lunch, you might take yourself to a park, you might cook something. It's almost whatever it is that your inner child or your inner artist would appreciate. It's giving yourself time to have that childlike curiosity about something. And that can be a range of different things. It doesn't have to be you sitting down to actually do that creative thing. It's whatever is going to make you feel good about yourself or inspire something creative in the process. The next idea that really resonated with me when it came to creativity was the idea of exploring your adjacent possible. Now, the idea of operating beyond your comfort zone or pushing your comfort zone can be a little bit of a cliche. But when you reframe this to the idea of the adjacent possible, this for me becomes a much more interesting proposition. This was something that really stood out to me when I read the book So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, where he advocates for this idea of operating in the adjacent possible. And this was something that was originally borrowed from the science space, where a biologist advocated for the fact that innovation didn't need to happen in these giant leaps. It just needed to focus on what the next steps were. So, what was the cutting edge of the field at the time, and what was just beyond that? That was where innovation could be explored. It didn't need to happen in giant leaps. It just needed to happen in that next layer. So think about how you can explore that next layer of your own creativity. So not the big leap, but just that next layer. So for example, that might be posting a video or an article or a podcast episode on a topic that you might not necessarily normally cover, or sharing a photo or a post in general that wouldn't be what you would normally share. This could be presenting your pitch in a slightly different way. This could be writing your article in a slightly more conversational tone than you normally would. This could relate to your personal style. Maybe this is wearing a slightly bolder outfit than you normally would, expressing your creativity in that way. So remember that your creative confidence doesn't need to happen in these giant leaps. It can happen in these everyday moments that push you closer to that version of yourself that you are trying to be, that creative that you are trying to be. And the next idea that really resonated with me, which is something that I read about a few years ago now and have always had on my mind, is something that comes from the marketing guru Seth Godin, and that is the idea to ship creative work. So, this was something that stood out to me when I read Seth Godin's book, The Practice. I believe from memory he's talked about this in different books as well, but it really stood out to me there because he really advocates for in that book this idea of not hoarding any of your creative work. So, make sure that when you put in that effort, for your creative work that you actually do share it with people, which is something that can be a challenge for creatives who are often aiming for perfectionism in their creative pursuits, and they don't want to just share whatever it is that they have already done. So remind yourself to have the mantra to ship creative work. And even those words that Seth Godin chooses for that mantra is really important. He talks about this idea of shipping, for example, with the lens of it doesn't count if you don't share it. Because he highlights that you aren't just this cog in a system, you are a creative being, you are a problem solver, and you have gifts to offer the world. And then he uses the word work, so ship creative work, because he advocates for the fact that whether you are paid for it or not, to pursue your creative work like a professional. So instead of aiming to create a masterpiece, focus on the smallest units of your genius. Thanks so much. For more on creating your alter ego, then check out my earlier episode on this topic. I'll see you in the next episode.